Hello and welcome to part 8 of my video series looking into the accuracy of missing 411 Eastern United States. Today we start the Midwest United States section, starting with Minnesota. There's no chapter intro, so we'll just jump right into it. Jack Pike. Jack, who is 5 years old at the time, went missing on September 5th, 1935 from St. Norbert, Manitoba. This case appears in this section due to the close proximity to the Minnesota border. The Pike family was on a road trip to pick blueberries. Jack ran off into the bushes on his own for a few minutes. Then he, quote, screamed as if he were terrified. The scream seemed to be choked off in the middle. Close quote. The mother ran 100 yards towards the scream, but found nothing. The parents scoured the area, but found nothing. The family was on the grounds of the Trappist monks' monastery, somewhat near Red River. After calling the police, the search lasted for 4 days. Jack was found under a bush on the riverbank, alive but unconscious. He woke briefly, but died just hours later. It appears as though the cause of death was exposure and dehydration. Some people say he was suspiciously far away from where he had disappeared. Let's review. I'm just going to interject my common complaint that a solved case is included in a book that is marketed as a collection of unexplained disappearances that have never been solved. But let's proceed. Going down to the 8th point, he lived just 9 hours after he was found. The articles that I found stated that it was starvation, not dehydration, but I'll mark it as correct anyway. As for the last point, 2 miles is not that far, especially since he had 4 days to travel that distance. Either way though, these nitpicks I don't think are enough to say that it's misrepresented. So we're starting off this section with a correctly reported case. Let's hope that that keeps going. Larry Coleman. Larry, who was 3 at the time, went missing on August 20th, 1949 from McGregor, Minnesota. The Coleman family of 5 was visiting their parents' farm in McGregor. The family went into the back of the farm to collect pine cones. They had spread out a little, and Larry suddenly disappeared from view, so quickly that the grandparents couldn't believe that he had gotten away from them so fast. They searched for a while, then called the sheriff. Thousands of searchers were involved, and the overall effort lasted 2 weeks. One of the searchers' dogs whined near a swamp, so search efforts focused there. A piece of clothing was found by a hunter in a swamp on November 13th. Larry's body was found on November 15th, 1949, in a swamp 2 miles away from where he went missing. No newspapers were found on Larry's cause of death. This section ends with a case summary, which, as you know by now, is not a case summary at all, but rather Paulides just taking the opportunity to ramble on about how odd things are, such as the removal of clothes and distance covered. Let's review. The first instance of misreporting we see is on the 4th point. The grandparents lost track of him because they thought he had given up on the pine cones and gone to be with his father. His father, though, was taking a nap and hadn't seen him. He had been potentially missing for quite some time before anybody noticed, from the grandparents thinking he was with his father, and his father just being completely unaware because he was asleep, and when he woke up, the assumption was he was with the grandparents. His body was found on the 14th, not the 15th. And the last point is technically correct. The coroner stated that there wasn't enough left of the body to determine a cause. The body was badly mutilated and scavenged. The area, however, was noted several times in many different articles as being bear infested. To clarify some other points, the clothes that were removed were taken off apparently before wading into the waters of the swamp. Furthermore, again, 2 miles is not that significant of a distance when you consider the time he had to get that far. Up next is Earl Somerville. Earl, who was 48 at the time, went missing on November 5th, 1957, from Coleman, Minnesota. Earl was a logger, and he had left the camp to go grouse hunting in a nearby swamp. Temperatures got very low that night, and it was felt that he could not have survived the cold nights. His body was never found. Let's review. His last name was Somerville, and perhaps more importantly, Earl showed up alive and well 3 days after he had gone missing. Search parties found him, and he was a little hungry, but otherwise unhurt. Up next is John Long. John, who was 58 at the time, went missing on April 10th, 1963, from Ely, Minnesota. He was a logger as well and had left the camp to go on a hike. He took a .22 rifle with him for protection. When he failed to return the next day, a search was launched. He was never found. Now, this case is remarkably similar to the last one in the way that was reported in the book, except that the name was correct. So if we review, John Long also was found alive and well. Quite a while later, actually, though. It was the 22nd of April where he showed up, which is 12 days later. He had become lost in the countryside, but had managed to live well enough by shooting game with his rifle. He even refused medical treatment and instead just went right back to the logging camp. It's what I call a work ethic. Up next is Milda Dahl McQuillan. Milda, who was 71 at the time, went missing on June 17th, 1975, from Ponsford, Minnesota. She was last seen driving her car on East Bad Medicine Lake Road. She was reported missing 2 days later. Her vehicle was found abandoned approximately 100 feet off the road in a heavily wooded setting. Nothing suspicious was found in the area. She was never found, and the road that she went missing on had a strange name. I'm not kidding, by the way, that's actually a point that is made in the book. Let's review. To clarify the fourth point, while yes, her vehicle was found abandoned approximately 100 feet off of the main road, what Paulides fails to mention is that it was still on a road. It was an old logging road that was disused, and the car itself was stuck in several inches of mud. So she didn't just suddenly walk away from the car was stuck. As for nothing suspicious, a scarf and belt that was believed to be Milda's was found at the edge of a nearby swamp. As for this last point, like many roads, this one is named after a nearby landmark. In this case, as you might suppose, Bad Medicine Lake Road is right next to Bad Medicine Lake. The lake is so called because early Native Americans in the area thought that a lake with no inlet or outlet was a bad omen. Thus, Bad Medicine, thus Bad Medicine Lake Road. The common theory is that she ended up on this muddy logging road when she missed a turnoff to her friend's house and her car became stuck. For those interested, her family believes that she was murdered. I'll link a newspaper clipping of a story done on her disappearance in the sources, as always. Up next is Kevin J. Iotti. Kevin, who was 3 at the time, went missing on September 30th, 1982, from Sugar Bush, Minnesota. He was hearing impaired, which I appreciate being noted in the book. He was last seen in his room. His mother went outside to do some chores, and when she returned to check on him, he was gone. The search lasted for 9 days. The sheriff stated that he felt Kevin had wandered off while playing with his dog, but he never cited any evidence for this. Let's review. All the points were either correct or I couldn't find a reference for it, except for the last one. The sheriff initially stated that he thought that perhaps Kevin was abducted, but there wasn't evidence for that. The wandering off with the dog has some very strong evidence for it, however. Kevin and the 6-month-old puppy went missing at the same time, and the dog emerged from a field by itself sometime later. Leanna Susan Marie Warner. Leanna, who was 5 at the time, went missing on June 14, 2003 from Chisholm, Minnesota. Leanna went to a friend's house, but nobody was home. She was seen going to the house, and no vehicles were in the area, but she was never seen again. Her mother was searching for her just 30 minutes after she was last seen. A search was conducted, but she wasn't found. Authorities now believe that she may have been abducted. And again, to this day, she was never found. Let's review. This is a great example on how all cases should be presented in Missing 411. It's to the point, fact-driven, with a solid background. I looked into this some more, and there was even some evidence somebody was giving her toys, and at one night she slept in her closet because she was afraid the monster outside her window was going to take her. She is indeed still missing to this day. Corey Kelly. Corey, who was 38 at the time, went missing on October 16, 2006 from Red Lake Wilderness, Minnesota. Corey and a friend went camping together, but realized they forgot to buy gas. Jim, who was Corey's friend, left to buy gas at 5 p.m. and returned by 7 p.m. Corey, in the meantime, went grouse hunting with Jim's dog. Jim couldn't find Corey when he returned to camp and reported him missing the next day. The search lasted for 2 weeks before finding Jim's dog 9 miles from the campsite, dehydrated but alive. 3 days after that, on the 28th and 29th, Corey's cigarettes, lighter, overalls, socks, and sweatshirt were found 14 miles from the campsite. The search continued, and in April of the next year, Corey's body was spotted by an air team among 8-foot-tall reeds, only 15 feet from a trail. Corey died from hypothermia. I'm going to read a section from the case summary here that doesn't make any sense to me. Paulides carries on for a while about how 14 miles is too far for someone to have gone, then says this, quote, "Many of the articles written about the Corey Kelly incident stated the possibility that Corey suffered from hypothermia and took his clothes off, as is sometimes claimed to be a condition of hypothermia. If the sheriff's theory is correct, that Corey did die the first night, then no, hypothermia could not have been the reason for taking off his clothes. Corey had a lighter and the ability to make fire. Why would he throw his lighter on the trail? He had his friend's dog with him. All hikers and campers know that if you snuggle with a dog, the dog will keep you warm throughout the night." Close quote. I'm kind of blown away by this because he basically discounts that Corey might have lost his lighter in the dark when he went for a cigarette, which seems likely because those two things were found together. Plus, the dog was found some distance away, so it's very possible and even probable that the dog had run off on his own by that point. I mean, basically he says paradoxical undressing is a theory, but it's not right because no. Ultimately, the only discrepancy here is a matter of opinion. That is, if this case is mysterious or not. Originally, in the script that I had written, I took the time here to include my own theory about what I think happened to Corey Kelly. Ultimately, though, it kind of felt like I was just rambling on for my own self and was guilty of the same thing that I find distasteful in Missing 411, which is pushing forward a theory without evidence. So If you're interested, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll let you know what I think happened. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and end this video here for today. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. I know that these videos don't get a whole ton of views, but it's important to me that the information that I present is getting out there. Next week, we will continue on with Wisconsin. Until then, take care.